Well, welcome everybody again. Appreciate you attending this session of the AgrAbility webinar series. My name is Paul Jones, and I am the manager of the National AgrAbility Project, which is housed at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. Our presentation today is on some new ideas in rural and farm assistive technology. We'll be sharing some software and other options for you that you may not have considered in the past for the rural audience. And our presenter today is Zach Elsroth from Adaptive Enterprises in Indianapolis. Before we start with the actual presentation, a few basic instructions. You do have the option of audio through both your computer or a phone line, and you should find that under the Quick Start tab at the top. If you're not seeing a PowerPoint presentation right now, you'll need to check the tabs at the top of your screen on the left side, and you should be able to select that. You can also check your sound options through the Communicate or Audio menu at the top on the left side. If you need closed captions, those are being shared through the media viewer, and that is one of the options on the lower right side of your screen. You'll need to click on the arrow for the media viewer and enter a couple pieces of information in order to be able to access those captions. You normally cannot see all of the options at the same time on that right, so you may need to collapse some to be able to view others. So expanding or contracting any of those windows on the right, and you can also expand or contract the size of that right-hand column by dragging on the border between the presentation and those options on the right side. If you have comments or questions during the session, please type those into the chat window. We ask that you not use the question and answer option. It simply is a little more confusing for us to try to monitor two of those pods at the same time. So we ask you to use just the chat window. Also, during the question and answer period at the end, we will give you the option of answering questions or asking questions verbally. You have a raise hand icon next to your name, or you should, and you can click on that if you have a question, and we will do our best to activate your microphone so that you can ask that question verbally. We do have 4 quick survey questions at the end, so we ask that you would stick around just prior to the question and answer period to answer those for us and give us some feedback on the session. We are recording the session, and it will be archived on the agrability.org website under the online training link. If you have any technical problems during the session, we ask that you try to communicate through the chat window on those, and if for some reason you're not able to use the chat window, please email me at jonesp@purdue.edu, and you might want to note that in case you need that sometime during the webinar. Also, if you happen to have more than one person viewing through your computer, we'd appreciate you letting us know that in the chat pod also, so that we can record that. For example, if you're in an office and you've got 2 or 3 or 4 people watching on the same computer, that would be helpful for us to know. For those who are not familiar with AgrAbility, we are a USDA-sponsored program, and we focus on issues of disability in agriculture. Every AgrAbility project is a partnership between a land-grant university and at least one nonprofit disability services organization, and there are currently 20 state projects around the country. There's one national AgrAbility project, and again, that's here at Purdue University at the Breaking New Ground Resource Center, and our partners for that include Goodwill of the Finger Lakes, APRIL, which is the Association of Programs for Rural Independent Living, and also Colorado State University. Please feel free to visit the agrability.org website, and there you can find out a lot more about our program. You can see archived webinars. We've done more than 50 of those, and there are a variety of resources available there for you to visit. So at this point, we're going to begin our actual presentation. Again, Zach Elsroth is our presenter, and Zach has extensive experience in working with vocational rehabilitation here in Indiana in regard to accommodating people with disabilities in employment. He specializes in things like artificial intelligence and how that can help people with severe disabilities, and has collaborated with a variety of organizations, including Adobe, Panera Bread, and universities like University of Colorado Boulder, Indiana University, and others. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Zach, and I need to pass him the ball real quickly here. And he can explain more to you about himself and also about the organization he works with. So,
great. Thank you, Paul. So my name is Zach Elsroth, as Paul mentioned. I'm really happy to be here to talk about what we've done and the prospects of what we can do in the rural areas and farming. It's something where I started working in a farm environment in AT for the first time about 4 years ago, and I was very surprisingly happy with the kind of positive outcomes we could create. So my background is I've been a development director for multiple Fortune 500 companies to develop assistive technology. And right now I am Chief Information Officer and partial owner of a company in Indiana called Adaptive Enterprises LLC, where we do a lot of assistive technology for vocational rehabilitation services, and we also have a presence consulting in multiple other states as well. So some brief about us regarding Adaptive Enterprises, just so you know the orientation that we are coming from. Our goal in technology is not only to evaluate what the user's needs are and what we can do with rehabilitation and technology, but to actually understand and implement how we can provide rehabilitation with technology. That ends up being very key in terms of rehabilitating individuals in rural areas and also in the farming communities as well, and business farmer orientation. As a company, our primary interest is creating users of technology and not necessarily one-trick ponies. We like people to understand how and why they're doing something instead of just teaching them to do A, B, and C. And then when we're out of the picture, oftentimes the support is not there to help the individual. And that's also incredibly true in rural situations where, we may be working in the field, we may be visiting from time to time, but in the end, once we pull out, the supports may not be there. That's why it's incredibly important when we're dealing with rural situations to actually, cross-train support people, make sure the user has enough training to become a user instead of a one-trick pony, and provide some different distance models as well. So from our perspective and implementation in different offices we have across the country, our first meeting with someone is typically done in an evaluation. And in that evaluation, depending upon what the funding source is, we put some different language in there pertaining to that individual funding source. Because we are dealing with rehabilitation and technology, we like to do a quick turnaround time on the evaluations. And realistically, even in the rural areas in Indiana, we turn around evaluations all the way from meeting a consumer, conducting a business evaluation, all the way to submitting the report, typically within 3 weeks. And again, on equipment, we want to make sure we actually have users. We want to decrease equipment abandonment, and that's especially true in the rural situation where there may not be as many options available as in a suburban situation. And then in terms of, apologize, I skipped an extra slide there, creative solutions, we also have satellite offices where we employ hardware and software developers. So we have many customized apps we've created in-house, many customized software, and we've even created plugins specifically for farmers where we've created technology that allows voice recognition to work with things like irrigation design software, with Google Maps, things like that, where little tweaks here and there, and we're able to cost effectively allow voice recognition software to work with farm-oriented software like irrigation software, as I mentioned before. So we end up doing a lot of different things like that. So sort of our first step is to analyze the requirements of the job. So if we think about farming and even the rural communities, it's a very wide variety of the people you serve there. I remember the first farmer I worked with was a gentleman that had about a 3,000-acre farm, 12 employees. The individual had a degree in electrical engineering, very bright person, had an accident, and was resultantly quadriplegic. With him, we had to do very much what was a business information technology evaluation and then apply the assistive technology from there on. And when we think about other situations, ones that are more rudimentary, where we even get into individuals who say, or just say farmhands, for instance, they still need help learning a routine. They still need help using technology to remember to take their medication, to remember to do some grooming, to remember the routine, things like that. So when we think of assistive technology evaluations, there needs to be a very wide, there's a very wide audience in terms of clients from rural to farming. So, first, we use the assistive technology to address aspects of the job. So, what are the main procedures of the job? For an individual that operates a 3,000-acre farm, a large part is accounting. A large part's understanding, what the individual is doing with different trading, different weather applications, irrigation design, things like that. So that's just an example, for instance, of understanding what are main procedures in a job. Routine secondary procedures of the job. What's the individual still do periodically that's very important? Say payroll, for instance. Say you do payroll every 2 weeks or once a month. That would certainly be a subroutine. So all of this, we're just collecting information to see what kind of assistive technology we can implement in order to assist the individual in returning to work and assist them in doing the actual job itself. But of course, we have to understand that job. And we, of course, want to understand what occasional procedures are taking place as well, whether they be paperwork, whether they do be field visits where we need to address there's a certain wheelchair to get to the field, some different things like that. And then we always try to use assistive technology to solve the occasional procedures of the job as well. So we always make a list of what random issues may arise. For instance, and we'll also have coworkers, support people, things like that, people like that, also make lists of what are they actually doing in their job. And we have to get a collective of all that information before we can start problem solving and seeing trend lines of how we can use assistive technology in the rural and business farmers. So, we find the trends. We solve the trends with solutions on hand. We can solve the solutions with off-the-shelf products that we can justify through different funding sources, whether it be the actual employer in ADA or vocational rehabilitation. And then we solve the issues with custom-built applications as well, which are things we can do in-house or we can farm out as well. And then when we do the implementation and analysis and procedures, we need to understand where the consumer is in the employment cycle. So this is, again, where are they? Are they trying to find a job, and we're doing some preemptive understanding and training as to what their vocational goal will be and how assistive technology can help them in the rural and farming areas? Are they returned to work, for instance? So that situation I was mentioning where, if someone had an accident, they can't quite do things the way they did before. So they're in a return to work. So we know more what the confines are of what the job actually is. And then individuals who are self-employed, they end up being a Swiss Army knife of needing a lot of different skills. And again, we need to understand what all that is. And then, as I mentioned, it's really important to understand AT, assistive technology, really isn't any different than another form of rehab. It really has an integral role where the consumer needs to embrace it. The consumer needs to understand why they're doing what they're doing and how it's going to help them. And we're talking about AT can help anywhere from a life to a basic needs regarding their employment. And people also need to be in a position where they're able to embrace the AT. Where are they in terms of their recovery and their return to work and rehab? Have they recently had surgeries, things like that? They may not be so interested in some of the basic AT that may help them with life skills. Say, creating grocery lists, for instance, may not be important if you're just now in the early phases of your recovery. So it's really important that in AT, when you're evaluating how to help people in rural areas, how to help people in a farming instance, you have to understand where they are in terms of how they can actually implement the technology itself. So, apologize. We have a few different trees that we see quite a bit in rural areas and in farming. We see it divides often into mobility impairments and into cognitive impairments. And I wanted to go over through a lot of the different mobility things that we've done and a lot of the different cognitive things that we've done. And a lot of these are technologies that you probably already have access to and can be incredibly invaluable. And this is sort of the thought processes we have as providers that we need to understand. And individuals who are helping individuals, in rehab in the rural and farm environments can certainly implement these as well. So, use of voice recognition technologies in terms of mobility. iOS, of course, is famous for Siri. Android, which has a very large market concentration, has incredible voice recognition and predictability. It also has something coming out now called Google Assistant. And there are also plenty of apps out there to supplement mobility. So when we all speak generally about, how do we use Siri, how do we use iOS, we would typically say something like, we oftentimes tell Siri to help us send a text or help us send an email. So the question becomes, when you have somebody in a rural environment or operating a farm, how do they continue using these sort of mobile applications to help them with their rehabilitation and their new way of working? Say, for instance, somebody has a mobility problem now and is quadriplegic, they'll find brand new value to using Siri, to sending a text message, sending an email, things like that. So when we've worked with a lot of farmers where things used to be much more pen and paper, things used to be much more stamp driven in terms of using the post office or writing notes by hand and leaving a note for an employee, things like that. Now we try to convert everyone to using as much mobile technology as possible. And that's something we hadn't necessarily seen much before in terms of smaller farms, where, now instead of just, using carbon pieces of paper to take notes, things like that, we're trying to get people to implement more technology because it's more accommodations friendly for individuals with mobility impairments. So in other words, if I have a mobility impairment and I'm answering the phone to take a quick note, or I need to take a quick note, it's going to be a lot easier for me to use a device like Siri, like Google Assistant, or different apps to convey that, what that message is, because I have mobility problems now and I can't write. And then in terms of desktop computers, the basics sort of treed from there is we have Windows, which has some very basic voice recognition in it. We have the Mac OS, which has pretty decent voice recognition components in it as well. And then we have all sorts of third-party components that can operate both on top of Windows and the Apple OS. So say, for instance, Google Voice, buried in Chrome, the web browser, you're able to download voice recognition that's compatible with Google. And you can take notes with it. You can do a lot of hands-free browsing, things like that. But that's something that's free within Google Chrome that you can use with your computer. So again, if you have mobility issues, if you're a farmer and you need to check weather.com, things like that, that's a free implementation resource where you can proceed, navigating the web for free. Sort of the industry standard that we've all seen over and over again is Dragon Naturally Speaking, which you can stay up at night and watch infomercials all about it, all the way to seeing its implementation in the legal and medical world. So Dragon is something that runs on top of both the Windows operating system and the Apple operating system. And it will allow certain hands-free abilities that are pre-programmed into it. And it will also allow for transcription, things like that. So out of the box, Dragon is very good at operating Microsoft Office, which, again, if we're somebody that had a mobility issue and all of a sudden we can't necessarily, handwrite anymore, then we're going to have to switch to new ways of doing things. For instance, if we can't use a hand calculator anymore, then we're going to need to switch to a new modality, which is using voice recognition. So out of the box, Dragon Naturally Speaking can handle a lot of those things. And for the versions we talk about for most consumers, it's around $100 or so for the premium edition. And then for the professional edition that allows us a lot more programmability and automation, cost is around $300, $400. And we'll get into some of those automations here that you could do by yourself here shortly. And then we talk about different voice recognitions in artificial intelligence. And this is sort of on the horizon. We talked a lot about Siri and how you could tell her to write an email, you could tell her to do a text message, but all these things you can also tell to do things such as make a reminder. So now we're getting into mobility meets cognitive or mobility meets office. You can tell it to add a task to a task list. So we're creating automation for somebody with a mobility impairment, where before maybe they kept a paper calendar and that worked just fine for them and they carried it with them. Now we're seeing more and more that they need to use artificial intelligence to quickly make reminders versus jotting down a quick note. And then in terms of office integration, we think about, if we now have a mobility problem, how are we operating in our office? I remember one consumer I worked with for quite some time operated his farm out of a small construction trailer that ended up having a significant remodel for accessibility. And little things we had to make work for him, such as how would he answer the landline telephone anymore? How would he triage mail? How would he actually file his mail? How would he file his blueprints and documents that he received? How would he file his irrigation plans? And that's all things where we ended up eventually moving to what was a paperless office with a scanning system with imaging on the computer, because he was able to navigate the computer and actually see the images and blueprints at that point. But we're starting to see more and more out-of-the-box technologies that could help with mobility, and particularly in the rural and farm areas. So for instance, Amazon Echo, which we'll get into, is a small little box that does some home integration with artificial intelligence, and it can turn on lights, it can make notes, it can do all sorts of ordering for you. Google Home is similar as well, where it's a cheap method to add some home integration for somebody with mobility. You could control a Nest thermostat with it. So all of these sort of small automations that weren't necessarily created as an assistive technology end up being of great help. Voice over IP telephone services, that's another really good way where we've switched people from traditional landline modalities over to electronic. So in other words, Vonage, Grasshopper, they're electronic phone systems that allow more control by the computer, hence could be controlled by voice recognition versus using a traditional dial pad. There's also all sorts of voicemail capabilities and things like that in there as well. But again, it's something where it wasn't necessarily created for disabilities, but ends up being tremendously valuable to disabilities because somebody with mobility issues could control them essentially hands-free. And then, of course, there are traditional telephones with voice recognition engines in them. They're pretty expensive. They plug in just like a traditional phone, and they're also not quite as reliable in our experience. But they do make traditional telephones with some voice recognition capacity, and we just don't quite see the success out of them. But they're a very good, simple solution. So here we talked a little bit more about mobility impairment. So this is Alexa, who is the artificial intelligence as presented by Amazon. And she acts as an intercom throughout the house. She acts as something that can control your lights and fans, can control different outlets, can control thermostats, and is extremely cost effective. Where before, to go in and do some remodels to add voice recognition, things like that, to something like a construction trailer would be quite expensive, probably worth quite more than the construction trailer is. Where something like Alexa and the smart home capability is very inexpensive out of the box, typically doesn't require any sort of hard wiring to any high extent, and just works incredibly well. And that's brought to you by Amazon. One really simple device that I've seen quite a bit out of different rehab hospitals is the Blue Ant Commute, which is approximately $40. And it's basically a device typically worn on the lapel that acts as a voice recognition conduit for something like your iOS, like Siri, things like that. And you can tell your Blue Ant to do things. That was something popularized probably 5 or 6 years ago, but for $40, the technology is still really good. So in other words, you can tell Blue Ant to answer your phone, you can tell Blue Ant to call somebody, different things like that. So it's a really cost-effective workaround that's been around for a while. And then in terms of voice recognition, we've even so people with mobility issues who are having to operate in a work area, we've set up multiple microphones, such as this Blue Raspberry, which is about a $150 microphone, where we end up putting these in someone's entire workspace in order to handle voice recognition for a computer. And one individual we did this with particularly, he could use his wheelchair throughout his office and yet speak pretty much wherever he was in a reasonable tone of voice, and he could do computer hands-free control. He could navigate Microsoft Excel, things like that. So again, this stuff wasn't necessarily ever built as assistive technology, but it ends up being very good as assistive technology. And then this is a sample. This is a version of QuickBooks 2013, this screenshot here. And why I wanted to bring this to your attention is this is something that could be very easily controlled with Dragon Naturally Speaking. So again, if we have a farm or rural person that does any kind of bookkeeping, this is just an example of a software that works very well. Out of the box, Dragon can control this. It's more of teaching an individual how to use Dragon appropriately. So say, for instance, the file menu, you could tell Dragon to click file. You can also tell Dragon to do certain keystrokes. And it's just like you have the file, the F is underscored under edit, the E is underscored over V, the V is underscored, etc. You can actually tell Dragon press Alt F, and it's the same as pressing file. So with these programs that have a little bit more traditional user interface, we can actually have an individual hands-free, cost-effectively control the program probably just as fast as somebody who is using a mouse. So that's an example of something where, a $150 copy of Dragon and a decent amount of training, the individual can understand how to control software with their voice rather than using a cursor. So in the past, for a couple of farmers, we've actually worked with some people with mobility issues that have done irrigation design for a multitude of different companies. a lot of the irrigation design companies have design software that's proprietary to them, and we've found that all of it works pretty well with Dragon Naturally Speaking. So in other words, a lot of these older programs are written in languages such as Visual Basic 6, which again, like that QuickBooks slide I showed you a few moments ago, has a traditional menu bar. You can access most of the information by voice. So a lot of these older programs were very keystroke driven, and they were just continually updated and updated and updated, never brought to more of a graphic user interface, but are more of a keystroke based user interface. So something we've seen is that individuals with mobility impairments can still use this kind of software extremely well because it's a little bit older, and yet it's stable because it was well written. However, the software itself is very, very controllable, all because you can say things like press Alt F, and it's the same as going to your file, or you can say all sorts of different commands like that. And we find individuals can use different kinds of legacy type software just as fast with their voice as they can with a cursor. Another example in voice recognition when things just won't work well at all is an option called the mouse grid, where essentially somebody's playing Battleship with a screen. From time to time, your voice recognition may get stubborn and you need to click something, for example. And in the end, you can continue zooming in and zooming in and zooming in with your mouse grid. So that's kind of a fallback for an individual that would not necessarily have the ability to use an input device and wouldn't necessarily have a helper present. So, and also when we get into certain hiccups with proprietary software where we can't lay voice recognition well over the top, or we get to certain hiccups where our programming cannot do one nuance of a control, we can always engage this mouse grid to tell the computer to click in a certain area. And then Google Earth, a lot of it is actually also compatible with voice recognition. There are different versions of Google Earth that show you everything from the very basic Google Earth that shows you the aerial and 3D viewing, all the way to ones that actually show lot lines. And we've noticed a lot of individuals in rural farm areas use Google Earth in order to understand certain properties. And then we've also found that most GIS systems are also compatible with voice recognition software. Some workarounds are required, but if I'm doing irrigation system design and I'm wanting to lay it over a certain lot, it's still very possible to use the websites that present GIS information with voice recognition technologies. So I want to go, so even though we see mobility as being a prevalent issue in rural and farming areas, I also want to go over cognitive impairments. And that's a very wide breadth of issues. Some of it could be from a TBI, from a traumatic brain injury, being hit in the head per se, some sort of head trauma. Some of it could be a transition student in a rural area that needs help due to a learning disability, someone who could be lower functioning and still require help, basically establishes a cognitive impairment. So some of the domains that we're going to go over is attention, executive functioning, life skills, reading comprehension, verbal comprehension, and written expression. And I just wanted to go through some very basic things that are oftentimes free, where an individual may just need to do some training online or get training through a company like mine to better understand what they're doing. So say, for instance, there are plenty of free calendar apps out there. Say Google Calendar. You could do everything from managing appointments, from the initial scheduling and rescheduling, to chunking time. Say, for instance, I need to break down a task. Say, for instance, I'm fixing a piece of farm equipment, and it's a multiple step task that's going to take me several days, all the way from disassembly to fixing it to reassembly. And I could chunk that out. So that's actually a skill to teach someone, is how to chunk their time. And calendar sharing. It's always good to know what your coworkers are doing, or for your helping people to help you with that as well. So, for instance, if you have a caregiver, it's oftentimes good to share a calendar with them. Google Calendar, you can do all sorts of different colorations with it and see all sorts of different views. AnyDo is another really cool app that is free, and it allows you to create a variety of tasks lists. So say, for instance, I have a cognitive impairment and I need to see what I'm doing. I could, with AnyDo, prioritize my tasks. I could break down my tasks. I could even show them in different views so I know when I'm doing it and what I'm doing. Astra To-Do List is another option for Android that shows a lot of the same. But again, if we have a cognitive impairment, or if we recently suffered from a TBI and are now dysexecutive, things like that, we need a lot of the reminders and task keeping. Google Keep is something I encourage everyone to download because it has a tremendous amount of interactivity, and it is another task assist program. Something that's really neat is I put my grocery list in there, and I put my address of my grocery I go to in there. And when I get in the parking lot, Google Keep actually opens my grocery list, and it also regenerates it. So it's pretty incredible that Google Keep knows when you enter the parking lot, your GPS is triggered, and it launches the particular list I need. But for an individual who's dysexecutive, needs help, things like that, a care person could actually help an individual set up all sorts of different lists. So, for instance, we had someone who needed help remembering his gym routine, so all the way from signing in to going to the locker room to do X, Y, and Z, going to warm up, saying hi to his trainer, and we just set different GPS points to actually remind him and tell him to go do those things as he got there. So he used his phone as a prompting device. And Google Now is part of that as well, all part of the Google Keep, Google Assist. First Then Visual Scheduler is also something for very cost effective. I believe it's $20 to $30. Don't remember off the top of my head. But it's also something where an individual could help with sequencing all sorts of tasks, and it would be an interactive reminder too. So it could be all the way from, you see there's a morning school routine, you could name it whatever you want, and then you could create different subroutines that are interactive from there on. So imagine, if I needed help, making sure I brush my teeth, I wash my face, and then I needed to recheck, did I shave, things like that. An individual could be prompted and sequenced through all those different routines. For people with attention and cognitive problems, it's oftentimes important to have them understand and perceive time. We set all sorts of different timers when working with dysexecutive individuals. Beautiful Timer is an example of a free app that shows you visually how time is, how much time you have left. You could set lots of different timers and time them to certain tasks. Say, for instance, I'm working in a grocery store and I know I need to go stock green beans and I have 4 boxes. I could ask my manager, how long do you think it's going to take? And I would understand where I am on that time. So say if the manager thinks it's going to take 15 minutes, I could set my timer and I would know where I am at that time and have a much better understanding if I've got a cognitive impairment. Time Timer is an iTunes product, an iOS product, and works very much the same. A lot of times we see distractibility in terms of impairments. So some people have poked fun at it, but there are many relaxing apps out there that people could use in the background while they're working, take a time out. We've realized we've worked with a few people with bipolar disorder where they need to just zone out for a few moments, and they've successfully used these apps. Breathe to Relax is very much a similar one, takes you through breathing exercises. And then those are all sort of in the realm of inhibition and self-regulation. And sort of the next step of that, beyond the moods, is tracking the moods. There are apps that actually will check in with you to see how your mood is. So say if I'm at work and I'm doing something and I'm not very happy at that moment, you can report to the app what's going on. We start to see trend lines as to when someone's mood starts to sway, or when it's better, when it starts to get more out of control. So that's a pretty neat element as well. So, and then Pocket Pond, that's another version of a relaxation app. Laser Lights, that's kind of a fun little relaxing game as well. But again, these, most of these are free or low cost. This is one of the mood tools I was mentioning as well. It's actually called Mood Tools. And then we get into planning and organization. There are all sorts of different apps out there. Some of these cost not terribly expensive. Draft Builder, it's a program that lets you collect your thoughts, lets you organize your thoughts into an outline, and then drag and drop your thoughts to create a paper. That's typically used for transition students, but honestly, we've used it quite a bit in terms of the work environment for people that need to write memos, things like that. Inspiration is a graphic organizer that will then flip into an outline. So somebody creates a concept map and it flips into an outline, or they could create an outline, then flip into a concept map. And that's, again, a crutch that may be used in the rural community where, say, if they need to process their way through something, they could certainly do that. This is a screenshot of Draft Builder where somebody goes from outlining to note-taking to draft building. And then this is an example of Inspiration where you could create a concept map and then it creates an outline based on your concept map, or vice versa. Working memory, recorded audio. So there are all sorts of apps different out there to work with working memory. In terms of disability population, working memory can also be a problem. So there are apps out there such as Audio Note that's low cost. I believe it's about $10. Recorded audio catches information that's missed while taking notes. Notes are time stamped for easy review, and can use text with prediction software. Smart Pen is something a lot of people have used. Kinesthetic learners use them quite a bit. So in other words, they're using a pen and it's recording what's going on while you're writing with notes, taking the pen while it's contemporaneously recording audio. This is an example of Audio Note on iOS where it's recording, but at the same time you're also taking notes as well. We like that because it's digital. It's what a LiveScribe Pen looks like as well. And then training is assistive technology. This is always a reminder we like to put in that sort of harks back to what I mentioned earlier in our philosophy, which is the Assistive Technology Act 2004 includes, quote, training or technical assistance for an individual with a disability or, where appropriate, family members, guardians, advocates, or authorized representatives of such an individual. So that ends up being very important in terms of successful implementation, where we try to include as many people as possible and be prudent with that. Google Untitled is a free customer relationship management software. So in other words, it was created as sort of a marketing tool, but we use it with individuals quite a bit because you can create tasks and subtasks within it, and it's free. So in other words, we could have an individual that needs to do X, Y, and Z as a task, and then Untitled would prompt them on a daily basis when those tasks were due, help them break down the task into subtasks, things like that. So it's another free application that I highly recommend people take a look at. And this is an example as well of Untitled where it shows overdue tasks today and then what's coming in the future, and it categorizes them such as phone call, to do, things like that. So again, if we have some cognition issues, all of this can help quite a bit. And it also shows us all sorts of intelligent things about where we are in our task as well, understanding where we are in the scope of things. There are also other products out there that are a little bit higher end that we've worked with higher functioning people that say had a disability, such as say they had an accident resulting in TBI and yet did certain amounts of work. We had somebody who was a middle level manager that used all sorts of database applications. So we ended up working with him to understand tasks into Gantt charts so that way he could better understand that and better control it. So we analyzed what information he still had and what skills he had, what he had known for years, and then used those skills, which was Microsoft Access and Project, to better understand what his tasks were. And he ended up working out very well. So all of this, again, if we're in business, if we're in the rural area, if we're in farming, we're all doing all sorts of tasks at different times. For other individuals, we've also created Microsoft Access forms where they go fill out certain things and then repeat the process. Things like that could be done on call centers, tasks, subtasks. So these are all things that we've custom designed for people. And then in turn, they would be able to basically understand and sequence their job better. Microsoft Outlook has a tremendous amount of tools. You can assign tasks, you can split tasks, you can take all sorts of different views. So again, in cognition and understanding where I am, business technology becomes assistive technology. Microsoft SharePoint is something where we have rural workers, we have people working from afar, telecommuting, and we can assign them tasks, we can see what they're doing. We can collaborate a lot better. So the world's a lot different place now where people can work anywhere and they can collaborate. And then in terms of customized solutions, some different products that we've made. One is called Task Assist, which is kind of like that visual scheduler we put in there, which is where people end up making lists and sub-lists of what they need to do and put them into perpetuity and set timers. So while this looks very boring in of its own, what it does is it makes it so an individual can have lists into perpetuity. And that ends up being important. So imagine if I work in a mailroom and I need to do different tasks. So say, for instance, I organize it based on room. I organize my mailroom based on room, and then my mail based on room. And then I stuff the correct boxes room by room, and then say I have to take my urgents to people, then all of this needs to be sequenced out. And different apps out there will help an individual sequence out. So that all ends up being pretty important in understanding where someone is in a task and how it is, because all of it comes down to prompting and sequencing when we get into cognition problems. And I want to thank you and open it up for any questions that you may have. I realize certainly that last half I went through rather quickly.
Well, thank you very much, Zach. And we're inviting you to go ahead and enter questions into the chat window, into the chat pod. And while you are doing that, we will do our 4 quick poll questions. Also, if you do want to ask a question verbally, please use the raise hand icon, and we will again, do our best to unmute your microphone or your phone line so that you can ask that verbally. So I'd like to open up our first poll question, and that simply asks about your affiliation in terms of what type of organization you work with. When you answer the questions, please make sure you click on the radio button next to the question, but you also need to hit the submit button that you should see on your screen in order for that to be recorded. So we'll give you a few seconds here to answer that. And we'll close the poll here in just a couple seconds. Okay, you should be able to hopefully see the poll results in terms of the responses there. All right, our next poll question. The computer's taking a minute to respond here. So it asks about the information that was shared today. Did you feel that the information was valuable to you? And did it meet your expectations? Okay, a few more seconds on that poll, and I will close it here. Make sure you hit the submit button again, please. Okay. And should be able to see the results there. All right, our next question asks about the technology that was used today, which is appropriate since we were talking about technology. So if you could tell us if the technology was effective and usable, I appreciate that. If you did have any specific problems regarding the technology, things that we might be able to address in the future, if you could type those into the chat window, we would appreciate the feedback and do our best to improve on that. So a few more seconds on the poll. I've got an automatic timer that's making me wait, so that's why we're having a little bit of delay on these. Apologize for that. And again, you can see the results there. Looks like most people got along pretty well. Final question asks, based on today's session, would you attend another session in this series? And our next webinars will be the AgrAbility Virtual National Training Workshop, scheduled for February 21 through 23, and we will be having 2 webinars per day for those 3 days. It's our annual web conference. So since you've registered for this webinar, we will plan to make you aware of the events that are going to be happening during that web conference. A few more seconds on that last poll. And we'll view the results here. You can see the results. Okay. I know we do have some questions in the chat window. I need to turn things over to Sean Ehlers, who will put those up on the screen for Zach to respond to. I need to make a quick adjustment here. Okay. Okay, Zach, are you able to see the question?
I am. So I could not specifically name one off the top of my head, but I know there are protocols in place where that's going to improve quite a bit in the future. Right now, they're working on a marriage of GPS and voice recognition to control wheelchairs, but there is nothing mass market, to my knowledge at this point, that does that. So absolutely, in terms of are there technologies available to allow someone to verbally control the manual operation of something, opening a door? Absolutely. And those are all things that can be integrated with different voice recognition technologies too, and even some cheaper home automation type things, such as that Alexa that we mentioned from Amazon. So you're seeing more and more of that come out, and those are certainly available.
I think we have one more question that was in the chat window we'll pull up here, but while we're doing that, I was very interested in the one app, and I can't remember the name of it, that actually alerted you, used an example of your grocery list. And I was thinking about somebody with a brain injury on a farm that might need to do repeated tasks. Is there a limit to how many tasks and GPS points you could load into something like that?
No, it goes into perpetuity. And we've used that application a lot for individuals with hundreds of GPS points. And that's all part of the Google API, which means if Google Keep did not work well enough for you, it's something where we have done work before, creating an endless amount of those GPS points, and even included voice-to-speech, or I'm sorry, text-to-speech in it as well, so it actually read the alerts. But and the GPS, it's obviously incredibly accurate. It's typically accurate within 3 radial feet. Some say 15 radial feet, but it's incredible for prompts.
Yeah, it sounded like it had a lot of potential there, so that was very interesting. One more question that was in the chat window. I'll just read that. Says, these were great suggestions for the farm owner or farm manager. What sort of equipment do you recommend for the farm worker? I'm not sure if they're referring to maybe migrant seasonal farm workers or just someone who is working for an employer, but any ideas on either of those possibilities?
Absolutely. So basically, if someone is a farmhand going out doing certain tasks, a lot of those apps, such as the prompting and sequencing, such as that first then visual scheduler I used as an example for preparing for work with grooming, you could certainly create tasks and subtasks that regenerate for the same repetitive task on the farm. So if you need to go feed X, Y, and Z, and you had different subtasks of each animal you're feeding, A, B, C, individuals may well need lists and prompting to double check that. And we've even created apps in-house so people don't sort of ignore the reminders. We've made it so they have to sign their name with their finger to forgive the reminder and prove that they've done that task. So really, a lot of the out-of-the-box recommendations in the PowerPoint would work very well for manual labor-type jobs. And like I said, we've customized those things to the nth degree as well.
Okay. Zach, I'm not seeing other questions right now. We're coming to the end of our time here. Thank you again for sharing. This was interesting in terms of some different technologies that we've not thought about as much in AgrAbility that do have some interesting applications in what we do. So thank you again, and thanks to everybody that participated today. Again, we will be sending out reminders about our upcoming webinars. If you have any other questions, please feel free to email me, and you can use the agrability@agrability.org email address if you'd like. And we wish you a good day.